I'm just being in love. I'm just being in love. I'm just being in love. When I met you, I didn't care about love. Didn't think that I would ever fall in love. Didn't know that we were so compatible. Simple, letting go. Oh, what a linger on the edge of heart. A metal line, it tears apart, it tears apart. No, they don't know what it takes to be in love. They don't know what it takes to be in love. They don't know what it takes to be in love. Oh, we both know what it takes. We both know what it takes to be in love. They don't know what it takes. They don't know what it takes to be in love. They don't know what it takes to be in love. Oh, we both know what it takes. We both know what it takes to be in love. We gon' be in love. This is something I can't control it. How you feeling, I just can't call it. I just know how I feel inside. I got love on my mind. Ooh, you know that I just adore you. And you know that I'll come before you. I just know how you feel inside. I got love on my mind. I'm just being in love. 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 I'm just being in love.
Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you for coming in to view the Just Live podcast. We have a heavy topic today. Our topic is the psychology of abuse. I'm going to wait for a few more people to come in here so we can have some heavy conversation. We've got a therapist on site. For those of you who feel that you may be triggered by some of the content, please remember to engage in self-care. I'll see you in just a bit.
I've been misunderstood.
Happy Sunday, y'all. We're doing things a little bit differently today. Some technical difficulties. However, we are here. And Kay, thank you. Happy to see you here. Y'all remember to go like the show and share with your folks. And bear with me while I work through these technical difficulties here on my device. That's okay. It's okay. So, again, today is a very heavy, heavy topic. If you have not already, go ahead and like the show, subscribe, share with all of your friends while we get into this very deep discussion about the psychology of abuse. And I just want to start off by letting you know that we have a therapist today by the name of Letitia Huger Hill. And she is going to be talking with us about what goes through a person's mind when they are being abused, what causes people to not report abuse, um, what kind of happens when people do report abuse, what's some of the feedback that takes place when that happens. And we're really going to get into this today. I just want to give you a little bit of background about Letitia. She is my friend. She is my friend. We have, you know what? I don't even want to talk about our friendship. I just want to talk about how dynamic she is of an individual. Wife and mother, Letitia Huger Hill. Lots of experience in the clinical field, lots of experience and education in the psychology field. And ahead of time, I'll go ahead and give you her contacts. And I will show these again towards the end of the show. But as you see, again, she's got a lot of experience in the mental health field. And the reason why that's important is because I want to make sure that you all know this is not just a show full of opinions, but there will be a lot of facts and psychological support to support this conversation. So, Immortal Entertainment Music Network, wow, look at my salon, brother. Thank you for joining my show today. Opulent Jade says, awesome therapist. Hey, Sanaa, good to be here. Happy to have you, Opulent Jade. I love you very much. And thank you for the compliment. This is my mom, y'all. I'm always shout out my mom. And so you know what? I don't want to waste any more time. I'm gonna go ahead and bring Letitia into the show. I hope you're ready. And hello.
Hello, hello. Happy
Hello.
Sunday.
Happy Sunday, friend of mine. Okay.
Yes, yes, friends.
Listen, y'all, this is the skillet of all skillets. I don't have no other way to put it. Like, I've known Letitia since I want to say 18, but I could have been 17. My freshman year in
96.
college. Yes.
October.
Ages ago, okay? Maybe right before I turned 18. But
Mhm.
long story short, Letitia has always been serious about understanding the mind and helping individuals. And she's been an advocate for as long as I've known her. And one of the reasons that this topic resonates so deeply with me is because, for those of you who don't know, I do have a history of domestic abuse. And I don't know that I ever went too deep into it with Letitia, who is a therapist, because of things that we're going to get into today. So, Letitia, just to start, can you tell us a little bit about your clinical background?
Yes. So I primarily work with individual families and children, adults. Um, a lot of my work surrounds helping people with depression, anxiety, bipolar, also diagnosing uh, other mental health issues as well as they come up. I also provide couples counseling to um, various couples, whether they're young, whether they're older couples, couples that are newly married. I also provide premarital counseling, relationship counseling for those who are looking to get married to their partner in the future. Um, Working with children in terms of behavior issues and things, working with parenting, having people understand the dynamics of parenting, new parents, also working with couples who, well, not couples, but families that experience divorce and how to co parent and things. So it goes pretty deep as far as the different layers that make up an individual and what I treat and things like that. Mhm.
Yeah, and you've been practicing for about how many years now?
Since 2023, so we're going on 12 years. But I've
Mm.
been in the field since 96, just kind of, going into it just as a young person and volunteering and doing, different interventions with young kids and after school programs and things like that. So I've always, once I got into the psychology field, I never left and just kind of stayed there and things. And even we did research in the psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry department and things like that, just to kind of see different behaviors, how they evolve and what they mean for kids and families. Mhm. Yeah.
That was actually kind of fun, that research.
Yeah.
Without going into too much detail, so we have also shared a lot of the same types of jobs over the years. So we're kind of like paralleling each other throughout our lives in some ways, not in always, right?
Mhm.
Because you stayed true to this and you stayed true to the art of mental health and
Mhm.
the servicing people in the direct service industry.
Mhm.
Whereas I found a way to kind of incorporate it into my music. I
Mhm.
found a way to incorporate it into my fashion design and
Mhm.
just into how I show up for the world. So I don't have the credentials,
Mhm.
but I do have the experience. So I think
Absolutely.
that is interesting, how similar and different we are, but without going too far there.
Yes.
Um, I'm just curious. You mentioned parenting, right? So, do you ever discuss triple P parenting, which is free for all parents in North Carolina, by the way?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's gonna be more of an evidence-based program, that kind of focuses on, different steps that you have to go through. So I don't necessarily use the protocol,
Mhm.
but a lot of my parenting work comes around just getting to know and understand the parent and child and
Yeah.
being able to really use more cognitive approaches to parenting. And so it's not, I don't use a structured intervention. It's more or less, what are the things that you need to know to help your parenting for this child,
Yeah.
each
Yeah.
child is going to be different and require different things. And it's more or less the cognitive approach to parenting as opposed to the structured interventions that are out there and things. And a lot of times, if it gets to a point where um, a more structured intervention is needed, I usually will refer to another resource that uses more structured interventions if it's something that's outside of what I would provide.
That
Mm.
makes a lot of sense. That makes
Mhm.
a lot of sense. A very tailored approach sounds like it would be extremely successful when it's all about that one person and their family.
Mhm.
I just want to remind you all, go ahead and hit that like button. We have a very deep discussion for you today. Listen, we're about to get all the way into the psychology of abuse.
Mhm.
I will share some resources at the end, and I will share Letitia's contact information again. Um, we were having some technical difficulties, but I am going to try that background music again and just see what happens. Y'all, just bear with me. And my little knuckles here. My knuckles are front and center. That's hilarious. Um, how about this, y'all? Tell me if what you hear is too loud. I feel like that's kind of loud. What do y'all think? How's that? Good? Y'all let me know in the comments if the sound is too loud. Hey, Janet Huger. Peace to you too. Thank you, everyone who's here for today's show. So, Letitia, can you hear over the music?
I can.
Okay, good. All right. Let's start with, what is the clinical definition of abuse?
The clinical definition of abuse. That's interesting. It depends, honestly, depends on what state you're in.
Mhm.
And it really is one of those things where some things are defined as abuse, some things are defined as force. But really, the definition of abuse is anything that causes emotional stress, anything that creates a sense of not being safe, anything that creates a change in how you normally respond to your environment. Those are all things that we clinically look for when someone is being abused. So the definition is broad, but it's one of those things that they all kind of share that common denominator is how it affects the nervous system. Are we triggered? Are we traumatized?
Can you give us the clinical definition of victim? And okay, it's looking like the music is a little loud for the crowd, so bear with me, Letitia. Let me work on that for just a sec, okay? I think that should do it. Okay. All right. So we're in the clinical definition of victim.
And so I guess for that, it would be something that would define a person who has suffered or someone who has been hurt or damaged by the action of another person. So it's pretty much going to be the same definition as far as the dictionary, the Merriam-Webster's, dictionary, what they would list, as well as, a clinical approach. It would more or less be, just a regular definition. So I don't think there's really a difference in the clinical definition and what everyone kind of the consensus of society of what a victim would be, but it's really going to be about what is the perpetrators, what did they do. Yeah, that's what makes it clinical, as far as it being an emotional issue, something that was an emotionally abusive situation versus a physically abusive situation, to determine what that victim, how they've been hurt by that particular situation.
Which is really important because that also affects the outcomes, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
What was done, how the person was affected by what was done. Okay, so we oh, you got a lot of interaction in the chat here, trying to get to all of it. Let me just entertain the chat really quickly. Okay. So Karen Edwards says, "Afternoon, beautiful people." And then lets me know I can call her Kay. Thank you, ma'am. Immortal Entertainment Music, again, has greeted us with Assalamu alaikum. And we have responded. Well, I have responded. Um, Opulent Jade says, awesome therapist. So she's just shouting you out, Letitia. And
Hey.
yeah, thank you for the compliment, Opulent Jade and Kay as well. Janet Huger, my sister from another mister, and Letitia's one sister. Peace, my beautiful sister. So proud of you. Um, Thank you, Opulent Jade and Kay, on the sound check. We appreciate it. Miss Linda Huger, hello. How you doing? Let's see. Lawrence Huger, hello. How you doing? And Gerald of Riviera, or Revia, I'm sorry for saying that wrong. What up? Him is here. All right. What's up, Malik? How's it going? All right. We got a big old crowd in here today. All right, Letitia. Let's get into the nitty and the gritty of it, okay? First of all, in my personal opinion, you got to be some kind of narcissist to be beating on people. It's
Mhm.
got to be something like, screwy up there. Or listen, I'm not a therapist, y'all, so I just be saying stuff. But my thoughts are something has to be seriously wrong with you for your response to not liking something to be go upside somebody's head. Okay? So I want to start there.
Mhm.
Are all abusers narcissists?
Narcissistic personality disorder is a diagnosis. It's a medical term that we've become comfortable using loosely, and it's something that um, I don't necessarily combine and say narcissistic abuse, because abuse is abuse, and there isn't a fancy term to make it into something that it isn't, and we hear that a lot where it kind of takes away what we can learn about narcissistic personality disorder. And a lot of times, narcissistic personality disorder is now being overshadowed with abuse. And it makes it harder to actually tease the two apart, because you can have a person that has narcissistic personality disorder, but they aren't physically abusive. Because the thing that really is the biggest part about narcissistic personality disorder is more of the manipulation and things, right? And so it's not necessarily only showing up with abuse, right? And so the two are definitely different. I think that a lot of times what ends up happening now in this space is we have people that are trending terminology and things. And I will actually have people that will come in and say, I need to figure out if my spouse or my boyfriend is a narcissist. And I said, well, your spouse has to be assessed for certain behaviors, because it's unethical for me for you to give me a listing of things and I say, yeah, he's a narcissist, take this home, tell him that he needs help. You know what I mean? So it's not a thing at all. But you'll have people that will be in toxic situations and needs to label it in order to say that, okay, this is why this is, you know what I mean? And so I think it's something that are two standalone things, especially in this day and age where people are more accessible to information. We just have to be really careful about how we label things. And as far as being a therapist and other therapists, being seen as gatekeepers of the profession, to be able to educate and say this is something that's totally different, because we have a lot of different types of abuse that happens, and it isn't that the person is always, relying, oh, it's my narcissism, that's why it's doing that, you know what I mean? So yeah, just we have to, as a society, just be aware of that aspect of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And so it sounds like a bit of gatekeeping is actually necessary sometimes.
Absolutely.
Sometimes gatekeeping is healthy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just to come back to my chat, peace, Shante, George. Thank you for coming to the show today. And Brother O has asked, will you be taking questions at some point? And actually, I do intend to ask questions if we have enough time at the end of the show. So, as you know, this is an hour-long segment. Kay has asked if we will speak on all types of abuse. Actually, we will. Uh, Ruth Huger, hi. How are you? Sending love to you. And Opulent Shady, yes. I'm not sure what you were responding to. Maybe Kay's question. And Shantae George has listed psychopath, sociopath, narcissist. Are you asking to talk about those types of personalities? If we have time, we may add that in there. But Letitia, just to get into the different types of abuse, and you and I were discussing this a little bit earlier, and I want you to define the types of abuse from the perspective of a child and then from the perspective of an adult. And I'm going to go off camera to work through some technical difficulties while you do, but we are listening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so there's a lot of things that I've seen, and I'm going to specifically speak about it from what I've seen in terms of trends and being able to allow an understanding, mostly not necessarily about what I treat in terms of abuse. Because what happens a lot of times, there's a lot of people that will come in, and if it's outside of my wheelhouse, if it's outside of my scope of practice, they would get referred to someone who is um, more structured in terms of how to actually work through someone who's experienced abuse and things like that. And because then in that space, we're looking more into trauma therapy. Now, I am not a trauma therapist. I'm a trauma informed therapist, which is a difference where I don't necessarily use a specific intervention to treat trauma or a specific intervention to treat an abuser, but knowing and recognizing when something is there in order to refer them to someone who can provide a structured intervention. Now, based off of what I've seen in practice in terms of abuse and things like that, a lot of times I would see a lot of covert abuse where someone doesn't necessarily know that they are being abused. When you have someone who is emotionally abused, it's a different impact that it has on their well-being versus someone who has been physically abused. That has everything has different impacts on the back end. So they're all negative, but it's a matter of how it impacts the individual. There's financial abuse, there is all of these different things. There is technology abuse where a person is controlled and manipulated through means of technology. And so a lot of times um, we're looking for the physical side of it. We're looking for the black eye. We're looking for all these different things, but a lot of abuse we don't actually see. And that's what makes it so dangerous. And by the time you see it, it's probably been going on for so long that you don't recognize it as being abuse anymore. You just learned how to survive in things, but your nervous system's talking to you, your body is talking to you, but your mind is saying, okay, what is this? You know what I mean? So there's um, a lot of different approaches to each type of abuse, but those are the ones that I see the most in practice working with adults. Children, when I used to work in community mental health, a lot of the abuse was very just the obvious abuse that kind of happens with children, such as you see marks and you see bruises, you see them acting out. Anything neglect is also a bigger part of that also. And it looks different in children because children don't usually have the language to express abuse. They usually display it in behaviors, either being very withdrawn and anxious or lashing out and aggressive. And so it looks different across the span of life, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Thank you for sharing this deep information. I've also seen that children who are being abused tend to have physical issues like enuresis, where they wet themselves a lot
Mhm.
and potentially restrict themselves from eating certain foods sometimes, or even eating at all
Mhm.
sometimes. Like you said, that nervous system will absolutely let you know that there's something going on. So, um, and we're not only going to stop with physical abuse, right? Because sexual assault is a type of abuse as well.
Absolutely.
And many more children than we know suffer in that way, don't they? Don't
Yeah.
they? So I just want to tap into the chat real quick, where Laura Tuger says, always looking for the meaning of things in depth. Thank you for this podcast. There is a picture being presented to me during this session. Thank you again. Thank you, Lawrence. And Mr. Malik says, this is the church I didn't know I needed today. Hallelujah. All right. So, a couple of things came to mind, right? And I do want to kind of save some time for sessions. We're about halfway through today's show, but I want to know, what are your thoughts and or experiences with children who demonstrate some of those abusive behaviors towards their parents?
Mm.
Like, let me explain what I mean. A lot of us have seen the Springer episode, or the Dr. Phil episode of the child that gets upset and hauls off and slaps their mom. Not in my community. Yeah, but it happens, doesn't it?
Mhm.
So when you see things like that, or have you seen things like that in your practice?
Mhm.
And even if you haven't, what is your clinical opinion on that type of behavior?
Yeah, and a lot of times those would be, something like a clinical approach taken in things because there are children that act out in that way, and it's a lot about how they regulate their nervous systems and things, and, what diagnosis that would kind of fall into. So a lot of times behaviors don't necessarily, mean that abuse is happening, and a lot of behaviors in childhood doesn't always lend itself to say that they would be abusive in adulthood in things. So you'll have children that'll have like DMDD, which is like they call it like a childhood version of bipolar, even though the two are different, very different. But it's something that signifies those behaviors of being very aggressive, highly frustrated, and things like that. And you can see that, and that doesn't necessarily mean that a child is being abused. But what happens is when we see that, those behaviors can kind of make parents become abusive in order to change that natural kind of way that they're reacting to their environment and things like that. And so that's where the parenting training comes in to say when you
Mm,
see these behaviors, to not try to reinforce um, doing something through then becoming abusive.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's almost like that, which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of deal. Are you acting this way because you were abused and this is the outcome, or did the abuse start because of certain behaviors? There's a lot of work being done now in psychiatry to begin looking at infant psychiatry, right? And so there's a lot of work being done with 0 to 5 as opposed to starting at 3. So we can see what's happening even in infancy that's lending itself to give information about how these behaviors might manifest and how do we even decrease the likelihood of abusive behaviors earlier on and inform the parents that this is what this is. This isn't just an unruly child. This isn't just a child that can't sit still and then the belt comes out, on a consistent basis and things like that. And so there's all of these different things that's happening now to even begin earlier intervention, because we're now in the space of, and we did research at Duke where 3 was phenomenal. Like, whoa, we're looking at 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at infants.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Because we even learned that it's even earlier interventions that we should look at to prevent abuse and things like that. And that's where that's in my wheelhouse, is more or less the prevention space, as opposed to adulthood, because they do have individuals that treat abusers and things like that. I don't necessarily provide that treatment, but I can identify it so they can get go to the places that do help with that. But I'm more or less on the side of, in the childhood piece, in the parenting piece, to say, how do we prevent abuse and things in that.
I know we've got Prevent Child Abuse NC out here in North Carolina, and we've also got Early Well, which is working on mental health intervention from a very young age. And I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because one point of view is, oh, they're trying to get our kids early, whoever they may be. But another perspective could be, well, a lot of trauma occurs while a child is in utero at times, and you'd be surprised at the effects that it has on the child. So the earlier it gets looked at and dealt with, the better opportunity that child has at a quality life. So just to come back to the chat really quick, Josh Sharif, hi, I'm glad you're here. It says late but present. Thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to like the show and share it with your friends. Opulent Jade says the shows are not long enough. I understand. We're working on that, and there may be a part 2, but I'm not going to make any promises. And she says, well, that makes sense. I'm assuming she's talking about one of your points. If you want to let us know which point you're referring to, I would appreciate that. You said a couple of things that kind of set off some light bulbs in my mind. And I just want to go back to when you and I were doing that research in the Department of Developmental Epidemiology. Look, y'all, I've done a lot of things in my life, okay? Yes, I sing. Yes, I design clothes. But I've always been on the philanthropy track. Childhood experiences have always been important to me for a plethora of reasons, but mostly because I'm a parent. And I am a reformed spanking parent. I used to be the one with the belt, whip it out in the shape of a Z like Zorro, and I would whip other people's kids too. Listen, I believe in being accountable. I have also taken a billion parenting classes on my own to learn more about how to parent my children without being triggered by different things that remind me of the things that didn't feel good to me coming up. We know culturally we have had some ways in our culture of parenting that we now know are harmful for children and are harmful potentially for development. So just being realistic about that. And just a quick plug, I'm a huge fan of Triple P, North Carolina. It's free.
Right.
If you have children in North Carolina, triplep-parenting.org. So just to run back to the comments real quick, you said what Letitia was saying made a lot of sense about infancy and older. Yes, ma'am. Got to get right from the start. You've got to get it right from the start. Okay, Letitia, I think we should take some questions because we've only got 20 minutes left. Before we do you have any points that you would like to drive home?
The only thing I can think of is, as the world evolves, so does parenting, in how we discipline, in how we relate to each other and things like that. And it's just a matter of being aware of the space that we're in, how it affects us moving forward as adults, and what we hope to really put in place for our children to make sure that they're healthy emotionally. We want them to thrive in the world that's coming. We don't want to use excessive force. I'm a pincher. Be a little pop, but I'm not necessarily a spatula.
Mhm.
The spatula person, or, and I think, and like I said, with each state is different, where, it's not abuse if it isn't an open hand slap, or it's not abuse if it's not hitting the face, or it's not abuse if it isn't leaving a scar from North Carolina. So, not to say that discipline isn't it's illegal, it's legal, but it's a matter of just looking at what are the limits and what's healthy, and what is going to make sure that the child is really receiving the most that they can from the form of discipline that's being used. Mhm.
And that's very important to
Mhm.
specify. Um, and in my opinion, and as a trauma informed therapist, it's also important to specify that if a child has been traumatized, it's probably not a good idea to use physical discipline of
Mhm.
any sort.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
Absolutely.
do you agree with that?
I do. I'm very, I can't find a purpose for physical discipline consistently, because I feel like if it works, then you only need to spank someone one time. You know what I mean? If it's something that you say, okay, this is it, don't do that again. And I make the joke that, when I received a spanking once from my mom and once from my dad, and that's all I needed, I was good. And it wasn't even nothing. It was because I decided to go like this behind my mother. When she walked away, I was 3. I didn't know. And I remembered this. And I didn't know that she had eyes in the back. Now I do. And she caught me. And I just got a little tap on my arm, and that was it. It did nothing.
First of all, you've always been very easygoing, so I'm really not surprised at that. Um, Gosh, like the show is really, really short, but I want to talk about batterers. I want to talk. I want to talk about parents who abuse their children and don't take the initiative to learn something different. There's so much to talk about, but we do have a couple of questions in the chat. So, Opulent Jade has asked, is there a specific time period for therapy, or is every case different? When you say specific time period, do you mean the amount of time that they're in therapy or how soon they should be in therapy after the experience? Hi, Princessa. Thank you for joining the show today. And Opulent Jade will wait for you to respond. Okay, says my mom was a spatula or anything she could find type of mom. She has been more of an emotional abuser. And I am now at 53 working through this. Sending you love. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. Let's see. Opulent Jade, we're here waiting for you. Princessa says, even in other forms of discipline, it requires more than one try and consistency. By that logic, anything should only take one time to work. Therapy itself takes a while to work. I agree with a lot of your points. My perspective on that is if it does not work right away with certain methods, after a while, it could become abuse because you know that it's not working, but you continue to do it. And I feel strongly about that when it comes to physical discipline, especially considering that a lot of parents tend to allow their anger to drive the physical discipline. And at that point, it seems like now you just want to hit on a kid. But
Mhm.
that's my opinion. Again, I'm not a clinician, but just why do you need to now keep inflicting pain on this child? Opulent Jade says, mine too, Karen. Shoe, belt, anything we could get. See, we talked about that. My mama slapped me with the chancleta, so now I'm just gonna tap you with mine, so I'm not abusing you, right? So if you did less than what, say, an abusive parent did, you're now no longer an abuser. But that's not how that works, is it?
Mhm.
What would you say about that, Letitia?
I mean, it's one of those things that the child drives what that experience is like, and some children um, are not affected as others might be, but the risk that we want run is, how do we know? You know what I mean? We don't know that. And you have some people that are grateful, and then you have some people that still are losing sleep, after they're older and things. So it's something that you don't know which side that you would fall on. And so it just really is more or less not about something working 100%, but the risk that's involved. It's a higher risk that this might lead to this in adulthood. So I think that that's going to be important to kind of acknowledge, because everyone's experience is different. Someone who might have gotten consistent, you know, physical punishment might thrive well. Another person who got that same physical punishment may not. But it's just, how do you know? And that's the biggest thing, is the risk that either one would have. Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you very much for explaining that. And so, Paulette Bernard, hey, Paulette, thank you for coming to the show. She
Mhm.
says, how do you or what should you say to a friend who is in a domestic violence relationship? And then she goes on to say, sometimes it doesn't work to get involved.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And that's where community resources come in. Community resources. We have things like offering domestic violence, um, the telephone numbers to reach out. If someone is in that space of domestic violence, or someone feels like they may be in a space where domestic violence is happening, and you're a friend and you see it, offering resources, because a lot of times people don't know the different resources that are available. Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Actually, I can agree with that. And there are a lot of resources out here. I'm also going to share the National Domestic Violence Hotline at the end of today's show.
Mhm.
Um, Princessa says children are not one size fits all. What works for one doesn't work for their sibling, let
Mhm.
alone the rest of the children in the world, right? Not even in the same household. Parents
Exactly.
have to be flexible and adaptive, which means you cannot be too tired to do what you're supposed to do. You cannot be too busy to properly parent your children. You cannot be distracted, right?
Mhm.
You really have to tap into your children and find out what works. And a lot of times, when you're still trying to figure out what works for you, it's not always easy to
Mhm.
recognize what works for your children. So,
Yeah.
personally, I say give yourself grace and get that information. Get
Yes.
therapy for yourself, and family therapy helps as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree.
Opulent Jade says, Letitia, what would you say to a person 50 and over trying to work through their childhood abuse? Oh, that's a good one.
Hmm. Definitely a trauma therapist that can help process childhood trauma. Being able to have a safe space is going to be important in that form of therapy. And there's a lot of different therapists that specialize in specifically treating childhood trauma and how it shows up in adulthood. So there's things such as brain spotting, a therapist that specializes in that. EMDR is another one, just in case if it's something that's very traumatizing and things. So there's a lot of different modalities that are used to help work through childhood trauma and how it shows up in adulthood. But it's definitely going to be about reaching out to a therapist and talking to a therapist to kind of figure out through assessment what's the best route for you. Mhm.
I can say from personal experience that EMDR is very,
Mhm.
very effective. And if you all are wondering what I'm doing, it's a
Mhm.
tapping method.
Mhm.
You are
Mhm.
grounding yourself in some ways, right? And every therapist may tell you a little bit different of a method to do that tapping in EMDR. There are also some other actions that you'll do in that method. And I agree that brain spotting is actually very effective. And I
Mhm.
believe personally that all people should examine their trauma.
Mhm.
Um, Because again, you don't know how every person is affected by the same experience. You
Mhm.
don't know sometimes until you are a lot older how that one thing that happened when you were a child may have informed your entire life and your entire belief system. So it's
Mhm.
really important. You got to know.
Mhm.
Princessa says getting to the root cause of the behavior issues is vital. Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
Those root causes are a big deal. Yes, ma'am. Y'all, please bear with me. I'm working through some sinus stuff today, but I appreciate you here sticking with me.
Mhm.
Shantae George says, enlightening discussion. Salute to you both and the platform, as well as those who asked questions I couldn't ask. This definitely has me smiling and raising an eyebrow. Well, that's awesome to hear. Thank you for sticking with us today.
Mhm.
Paulette Bernard says, great. I'm assuming in response to her question about domestic violence support.
Mhm.
Josh Sharif says, how can a parent who is in an emotionally mental duress from, for example, single parenthood, with very, very little, if any, community support, make time for classes or conscious parenting? Easier said. Now, I'm going to let Letitia respond to that, but I'm going to say it took me over a year to finish Triple P parenting. It actually took until the pandemic, when I had a lot more time at home, for me to sit down and go through the modules. So that's a very real question in regard to just the day to day. Ooh, excuse me, the day to day. Letitia, I'm gonna give you the floor.
Mhm. A parent who's in emotional distress, the priority would definitely be to um, stabilize and to be able to have those other resources and things. And when we say stabilize, we look at starting from the front lines of what's available in the community, such as a primary care doctor, to be able to talk to a primary care doctor and how to begin knowing what's available. Knowledge is a big part, and it's hard when you don't know what you can do. Right. And so I definitely can understand how mental distress or mental duress can really hold things up as far as time is concerned. But it's really looking at all of your resources. One of the things that I found helpful that a lot of people are not aware of in their communities is going to be their health department and how much resources that the health department offers as far as services for the parent as well as for the child, and how to really not only rely on classes that you have to go to, but even just knowing that when you have time, how do you build this into your day? One thing I'm really glad about too is the use of telehealth and technology to kind of help in those spaces to reach people in areas where resources may not be so easily accessible, or time is not accessible. So, or being able to make time to do certain things. Um, I think that's going to be important too, to know what's available, what fits for you, so that it isn't like a one size fits all solution, but knowing what solutions exist is going to be big.
Thank you, Letitia. Okay, trying not to embarrass myself here on the screen with all these sinuses and whatnot. So listen, it's a mess right now. So I'm gonna go down through these comments. Let's see. Opulent Jade did say thank you, Letitia.
Yes, you're welcome.
Princessa says a good trauma therapist can be a godsend. Yes, ma'am. Totally agree with you. As parents, we have to be willing to examine ourselves as much as we scrutinize our children. Okay, we all need to be a positive influence within our village. See, that's that accountability piece that
Mhm.
I believe we could benefit more from in our communities, whether you are an abuser or a victim.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that is not to blame the victim either. That is just in saying, see how I can get myself safe.
Mhm.
Now, I said that, and I would just like to drop. some domestic violence statistics. I know that several years ago, it was 1 in 7, not 1 in 7, let me say this correctly. It took 7 attempts to leave a situation that involved domestic violence. And that's not including those who were murdered, right? And rest in peace to those who were murdered in domestic violence situations. And it seems that now that number has increased to 8 times to leave before you're finally able to get out. Do you know much about those statistics?
Like I mentioned, I wouldn't say that I'm on that end of the abuse cycle as far as being able to quote the exact statistics, but being able to understand that I know that it takes definitely several times and several attempts to leave. And once someone does leave, I usually see the person in therapy once it's usually a past issue where they were in an abusive relationship and they're getting into society again, reintegrating, and the past abusive relationship begins to show up in how they connect in new relationships and things. um it's a trust issue. When you have someone that you trust and believe in, you really trust that they're not going to do it again. You know what I mean? And just understanding that abuse cycle and what it's like to be in an abusive relationship. Abuse is not happening every day. There's great times, And I remember there was a quote that you put on Facebook about maybe, I don't know how many years ago, and you said there's good times in bad relationships and there's bad times in good relationships. You just have to know which one you're in. And that is something that I think should be the slogan for how to recognize what you're in, because it's not always abusive. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand if they haven't actually been in an abusive relationship, is sometimes it's great. And with abuse being something that's a cycle, it's almost like an addiction where you're always doing everything to get that good time again, you know? And so that's why it gets longer to leave, because you believe and trust this person, you know?
Uh, you know, that absolutely makes sense. And it's like you're either afraid to go in a different direction, right? Or you are, what's that word for people who are kind of bonded to their abuser? I may be saying that wrong. Is it Stockholm syndrome?
They call it like a trauma bond, or, you know,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
definitely a trauma bond. Yeah. I just want to point out where Josh Sharif said, great point about telehealth, Letitia. Thank you for that. It's at least a start. Reasons, health insurance, and mental health resources for all is vital. Yes, I totally do agree. Kay says, excellent words. Princessa says, that's right. And I feel like Jade says, wow, deep. And Scum TV says, hey, Queen Sanaa. Hey, Scum TV. Thank you for coming through today. We are having this deep discussion right now about, okay, Josh Sharif did name Stockholm Syndrome. And definitely that trauma bonding, which does tend to happen in new relationships because you both kind of tend to pull from that trauma space and link to each other in that way if you haven't healed that trauma.
Mhm.
And if you don't recognize it early, it seems that it would happen over and over and over again. What are your thoughts on that, Letitia?
Yeah, you only know what you know. And if you haven't been in the situation before, it just, you don't know what you're in. And even the other part, if it's something where you are used to that and you're used to seeing that, and it's a part of your normal being, you actually find a sense of comfort in it because it's familiar. You know what I mean? And not realizing the dangers of it, you know? And so there's so many different layers and levels. But the biggest part is just recognizing that you're in that.
Um, I think it's critical to know, to recognize, and sometimes someone else has to be a mirror for you if you're so
Mhm.
deep in that you don't recognize it for yourself. You all, this is a very deep discussion, and the comment is offering some robust discussion as well. Thank you all for interacting with us. Our show is nearing the close, so please go ahead and hit that like button. We always appreciate it. And as I said before, the more you like the show, the better the content. I don't understand the science behind it, but it does get better the more likes I get. And just my favorite little reel for you. Please and thank you. So I want to touch on one more thing before we get out of here, Letitia. And this is a very deep part of the discussion for me. I was reading some information that said that domestic violence statistics are skewed when men who experience domestic violence are included because the numbers are so low. I also read that more men who experience domestic abuse are abused by men than they are abused by women. So, what I want to do before I choke on these words, because I feel a cough coming on y'all, I want to ask what that means, A, for the amount of women who are actually being abused, right? Because if these people are abusers, most likely they are committing abuse to multiple individuals, right? And uh, excuse me, from your experience, what are some of the reasons why so many men who are being abused do not report? This is a three-part question. And third, do you believe that the numbers are so low of men who are abused by women because of lack of reporting? I just want to touch on that briefly.
Mhm. It could be. It could be. Um, I know the underlining thing with reporting, just even outside of gender, is going to be the shame that's involved. And I think it's one of those things too where, to me, it just seems that it would be the level of shame that a person might feel in terms of how they may um, come forward with talking about it from their experience. um, the number for women that do report would probably be higher. Um, the number that men report would probably be lower because of uh, the idea of thinking that it's something that they are allowing to happen. So they may not look at it as abuse. That's just my opinion. Um, the other thing that they're looking at that I've read too, as far as women that are identified as being abusive, if they have a history of being abused themselves, they're not necessarily looked at as being abusive. Women who abuse, they're looked at as women who use force. So there's a lot of research that's still kind of happening in that space. It's fairly new to really get more numbers for men that would report on abuse and things like that. And so I'm not sure as to why that would be something, because I think that it's still up for question. And even with research, you still have to answer, the questions that are being researched. You still have to answer those questions accurately and things like that. And so I think it's more or less just looking at the whole big picture of what society just places on abuse victim dynamic and things like that. Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's interesting that you said women who use force. And
Mhm.
we could go all the way down that rabbit hole, couldn't we? Um, Thank you, Kay Edwards, for showing up today. Linda Huger says, great session, ladies. Love you guys. Princessa, yes, I will. Absolutely. Strolling through. Hey there, you just strolling through today? Every Sunday. It's good to see you. Ruth Huger, thank you very much for watching today's show. Princessa did say shame and issues within the system keep people from reporting. Yes, ma'am. And then Scum TV says if men were to report abuse, the numbers would be extreme. You know what? I will not argue with that point. I would encourage all men to report abuse if you are experiencing it, because listen, no one should be abusing anyone. And there are women out here hitting men upside the head with pots and pans, stabbing, causing physical damage. We know this is happening. We don't know why. That's not as important as what. What is happening? What are you doing? Stop doing that. So, men, report abuse. Women, report abuse. Children, if you can, and not because you can't get no PS5, report abuse. Okay, this is very important.
Mhm, mhm.
Princessa, thank you so much. I'm just going to share a few resources. Scum TV, verbal abuse. Now, Letitia, let me ask you real quick before I close out this show, because y'all, this topic could go on for several hours, couldn't it, Letitia?
Oh, yeah.
But it's Sunday, and some people got to watch football. Excuse me. I got to get something on the stove, okay? So, Letitia,
Mhm.
do you think that verbal abuse is a reportable offense or an offense that can be dealt with through therapeutic intervention?
It depends. It depends. That's one of those things where usually verbal abuse, you can't, I haven't heard of anyone who called 911 and the police came for verbal abuse. That's those abusive kind of situations that aren't really viewed as a danger physically. And that's why those are so deep, because the intent is to deal with it, get through it, and things like that, because it's not something that you can call and stop. You know what I mean? You have to handle it in that space. I think that's what makes it so much more damaging as well, because it's something that, what do you do when you're in that space and someone is, you know, verbally abusive, name calling and things like that? The only thing that you can do is make the decision to remove yourself from that environment or situation.
I agree. And I know that sometimes you can't always leave. Sometimes there's a block the door type of situation.
Mhm.
Scum TV says verbal affects mental. It seems worse. I've heard that mental abuse sometimes hurts way more than a hit or a punch or a kick. And, you know, choking on all these words, boy. Depending on the person, I can see that being true. I just want to go back to Janet Huger, who says there is power in knowledge. Change happens when we acknowledge the need for it. And Opulent Jade, who says, great guys, great show. I'm just going to close out here with the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is here. Let's see if I can get that off the screen. National Domestic Violence Hotline. I hope that you're able to see that. There is an 800 number, and there's also a TTY for those who are hearing impaired, serving all the 50 states, as well as Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And if you go to the site, which is featured here at the top, acf.hhs.gov is what I believe I'm seeing. You can access all of that information. I just also want to highlight people promoting peaceful processes. You can find them on Facebook. They are currently serving those who experience physical abuse and sexual assault. And once again, giving you Letitia's information for contact if you want. Let me also take this off the screen. If you all have any further questions, please do reach out to Letitia on her socials. Opulent Jade highlighting the 10-year-old who killed his mom over a device that he could not get. I would be really interested in seeing what his mental health issues were. Not necessarily to be nosy, but more so to kind of understand what the psychology is behind a child who responds in that way, you know? So I'm not going to say too much about that, but rest in peace to his mom who lost her life in that situation. Letitia, thank you so much
You're
for coming
welcome.
and doing this show. I hope we can do a part two one day. I really do.
Yes, do it.
Hopefully without me barking in the background, okay, with all this sinus stuff. Y'all, this North Carolina weather, we done went from spring to fall back to winter, and here I am. So this is how it affects this Brooklyn girl still all these years later. And
Yes.
You know how it is, Letitia.
Yes, yes,
So,
absolutely.
y'all, thank you for being so kind to my guest today and making her feel welcome. Well, I hope you feel welcome.
I do. Yes.
Yeah. And I hope to see you here again. I'm
Yes.
just looking for a good song to take us out on. I feel like the self-love anthem is a good one, but it's not coming up. So you know what? I'm going to give y'all a little God's heart, and I hope you all have a great rest of your Sunday.
Yes.
I hope to see you next week. I
Yes.
will just live by getting to the root cause of this sinus stuff. Okay? Getting to the root cause of my
Absolutely.
traumas,
Mhm.
growing myself as a person so that I may grow my children. Letitia, how will you just live today?
I am going to make a T-bone steak, and I am going to read a book that I've been working on, and I am going to watch a comedy and take a nap for about 30 minutes.
Sounds
Or
like some good old self care on a Sunday. Yes. All the best to you, and you have a wonderful rest of your week to you
yes,
and everyone else.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you. I'm gonna get it together.
I'm just being in love. 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 When I met you, I didn't care about love. Didn't think that I would ever fall in love. Didn't know that we were so compatible. Simple, letting go of what I leave on the edge of heart. I bet I'm gonna tear us apart. No, they don't know what it takes to be in love. They don't know what it takes to be in love. They don't know what it takes to be in love. Oh, we both know what it takes. We both know what it takes to be in love. They don't know what it takes. They don't know what it takes to be in love. They don't know what it takes to be in love. Oh, we both know what it takes. We both know what it takes to be in love. This is something I can't control it. How you feeling, I just can't call it. I just know how I feel inside. I got love on my mind. You know that I just adore you. And you know that I'll come before you. I just know how you feel inside. I got love on my mind. I'm just being in love. 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 I'm just being in love.